Join me as I teach the science and biology of trauma that allows us to be strategic, intentional, and organized in your approach to address difficult and painful life experiences that has become your biology. Trauma Healing Accelerated is where you get a roadmap for the right tools in the right order for your healing journey. Now, most people who have attachment trauma actually don't recognize that they have attachment trauma. As a medical physician, I didn't see attachment trauma in myself until I knew what to look for. I grew up with a father who was adopted at birth. I was familiar with the look of pain, of loneliness in my father's blue eyes. I was finishing up a master's in biochemistry and going back into third year of medical school, landing on the hospital floor of my first clinical rotation, internal medicine, and 4-year-old Miguel lands in my life as the first foster child placed with me. It wouldn't be until 8 months later that I would adopt him. Inspired by his early life experiences and his struggles, I started studying attachment. I could see the pain in his eyes of feeling like he couldn't trust anyone, and the anger in his eyes when he would realize that we had had a moment of connection, true, authentic connection. We had laughed together. He had let his guard down, and how dare I love him? How dare I see inside of him? How dare he let his guard down? He knew that he was unlovable, and if he let himself be opened up and be loved and to love, the pain of rejection and abandonment that he knew would follow would be more than what he could bear. He would rather go through the pain of loneliness than the pain of rejection. Miguel helped me start to see those patterns and belief systems in myself. And why would I have these patterns of attachment? Why would I have attachment trauma? This made no sense to me. My childhood had been nothing like what Miguel had had. Miguel, I could understand. But me? And we do that, don't we? It's easier for us to see what others carry around before we can see it in ourselves. Like me, you may recognize that you have an insecure attachment, or you may not even know about any of this attachment and insecure attachment style, which is also fine. Attachment is both one of the most simple and yet complex things of life. And I want to read this to you from my excerpt from the Attachment Trauma Roadmap. We desire relationship, and yet we are afraid. We push people away, or we can also hang on to them too tightly. Actually, most of society has some degree of attachment trauma, and thus that means that they were affected by a disruption in the attachment process that resulted in these attachment trauma patterns. These patterns that got wired into the nervous system while it was still developing. See, the nervous system is like an electrical circuit of wires. And there's, yes, a big clump of those wires in your brain, but then it also runs throughout your entire body, engaging with every single cell in your body. And these wires, like every wire, is made up of threads. And so attachment trauma becomes a thread that makes up the wiring of the nervous system throughout your mind and body. The process of attachment actually starts while we are in the womb and forming, because that is when the nervous system starts forming. And attachment and neurodevelopment, or the development of the nervous system, not only happen together at the same time, they are the same thing. Your attachment style is actually just the manifestation or the expression of your nervous system developing in relationship with another, which would have been your biological mother. Let me read this other section from my Attachment Trauma Roadmap. Attachment is formed much earlier than we used to think, because we thought attachment solidified by the age of 1 to 3 years. But this is because we measured attachment through behavior. And behaviors don't easily show up until a child is enough to have the independence to walk away, to act out, for us to see these behaviors. And it's been true for adults. Behaviors have been the measure for attachment style in adults, and specifically the behaviors that you do in relationship with someone else. And so all relationships, and certainly those relationships that require more intimacy, will be where you can see attachment trauma patterns show up the most. And so my question for you is, how do you respond to intimacy? And by you, I'm really talking about your nervous system, so don't take it personal. How does your nervous system respond to intimacy, those moments when you are with someone else? Does it become dysregulated with intimacy? Do these internal felt sensations of insecurity show up, either when you're with them or then when you're not with them? Do your behaviors suggest you are clinging on too tightly, or maybe not holding on as much as the relationship should call for and holding even a part of you back? There are two things you need to know about attachment and how your early life key relationship was experienced, because it gives us a deeper understanding of ourselves and a clear path forward to changing it now. This is a graph from my attachment trauma roadmap, and it shows the two things that determine our attachment and whether it will be a secure attachment wiring or one of attachment trauma. Those two things that you see are attunement and autonomic regulation. These two things happen even while we are starting to develop in the womb, and these are very early life experiences. Even when we are so young that we don't have the words to speak yet, attachment is happening. There are many disruptions that occur in attunement and regulation from common social parenting practices. I want you to see in this graph that it does not need to be abuse or neglect, but merely can be common disruptions of attunement that cause dysregulation. And any misattunement or dysregulation that is either for too long or doesn't get repaired results in the experiences of overwhelm. And that's what starts to thread in attachment trauma patterns into the developing nervous system. Experiences of overwhelm before we even had the words. Some, like my father and Miguel, had clear ruptures in the attachment process, not just disruptions. Now, there is no judgment here because parents are not taught how to recognize misattunement, dysregulation, let alone how to repair. And they likely didn't experience that in their own childhood to be able to pass that along. And so what happens? Well, as we are adults and we go into relationships and we see that with intimacy, people can lose a sense of safety. They don't feel safe with intimacy. They engage in unhealthy intimacy, meaning they are intimate with people that have not earned their trust yet, are actually not safe people. Or they are never able to fully let their guard down when someone is safe. They always have that sense of doubt of whether they are truly safe, of whether this person is truly safe in the relationship. And so what's happening in the nervous system? Well, here we go all over again. It's the same pattern. It's the same pattern of dysregulation and misattunement that happens in intimacy as adults as what happened in our very early life relationship dynamics. So attachment becomes wired into our nervous system. It becomes the basis for not only our future relationships, but our health, our physical health, emotional and mental health. Attachment is our nervous system. And if attachment is our nervous system, I want to ask two questions. How does the attachment form? And what can I do about it now? Samantha, a mom of 3, one of whom is adopted, is a nutritionist and going to school for a marriage and family therapist degree. She was burning out. She didn't have the time to think about it, though, because she was so busy with her family life, schooling. She kept pushing through her days and weeks and months because she had to. Her husband was working. He was having stress with his business. And when he did arrive home, he was tired. He didn't want to talk about work. and he would go into his own world, and she felt distanced. This started triggering her, and she noticed that she wasn't even trying to connect with him. Just let him be. And she went into her own world. She would go into her own thoughts, and there would just be these, they're coexisting, but not connecting. She came into this 21-day journey because she was emotionally dried up, feeling empty, nothing left to give, though that is what she continued to do every day. Give, push through. She was afraid she was nearing her breaking point, and sessions with her therapist weren't really helping. She had tried yoga and meditation, but honestly wouldn't be able to keep it up. She wasn't aware that these things were related, but her labs were showing magnesium deficiency, low morning cortisol levels, and her thyroid hormone levels that were still technically in the normal range, but were inching towards hypothyroidism. Not sure what to do, but knowing she needed to do something, she decided to do the 21-day journey. Now, the 21-day journey immediately gave her tools, somatic or body-based exercises to do that in less than 2 minutes helped her regulate. This is a key point we're going to come back to. And then she was ready to process and continued on in the attachment and neurodevelopment biology of trauma module to start the processing piece while building her capacity for regulation, specifically in regards to the attachment. Looking at her story, there was a big clue in her story that she had attachment trauma, even though she never would have recognized that in the first place. A big clue that she had attachment trauma as part of her nervous system wiring, her response to her husband distancing himself. Unintentionally, she knew it was related to his work, but as a result of that, she distanced herself. She shut down. There are 2 points from Samantha's story that I really want to highlight. Attachment is not something that is separate from our nervous system. It is our nervous system because it was wired in through experiences of the nervous system while it was developing. And attunement and regulation, both of those formed our attachment, and they are our way out as well. Second point, as we look at rewiring these attachment patterns later in life, there are 2 pillars that form the necessary foundation for rewiring attachment trauma that Samantha showcased in her story: regulation and processing. Many people jump to processing trauma, processing their childhood, without the regulation piece, and that's where they go wrong. They can actually put their system back into overwhelm, and next thing they know, they're feeling tired. They're reaching for coping mechanisms to feel more energy or to feel better. They're experiencing flare-ups in their physical health symptoms, and all because they started processing before they were ready to process. This is actually true for all trauma, not just attachment. And by trauma, I really mean life. Processing can be done after regulation. And in fact, our capacity to process is directly related to our capacity for regulation. So how is your regulation? How are your skills for regulation? Do you understand yet what regulation really is? And guess what affects your regulation? Attachment trauma. Having unresolved or persistent attachment trauma patterns will decrease your capacity for regulation and thus for processing trauma. Now, regulation takes work, and it's the application of intentional tools, and is something that can and needs to increase with time, meaning like your ability to regulate should increase with time and putting in the work. And yet without the tools and without knowing how to increase your capacity for more regulation, you will be limited in your ability to process early attachment patterns, childhood, life. And this is true also for physical, mental, emotional health, because all of the regulation is what drives those symptoms as well. So you need tools for regulation specifically to not waste your time, not waste your money in the work that you are doing on your healing journey. For now, I encourage you to read the Attachment Trauma Roadmap for this deeper understanding of yourself and to learn about regulation, since that is the key for you to be able to process safely.